for Anita. You might need the water here, like closer to you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? We're excited to be here to discuss this exciting and important topic. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to all of you. So starting with you, Anita, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do and where you're from.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Fabulous. My name is Anita Erskine. 20 years ago, I thought I wanted to be God's gift to television. After 10 years, I realized that actually God had a bigger plan for me. So I veered into anything that is under the umbrella of media. And of course, with time and with decades and with years and with technology, evolution has been my best friend. So today I introduce myself as an entrepreneur in the communications space, corporate communications, social impact, and of course, traditional media, which is television, radio, and everything else in between. That's who I am.
I'm Enuma Okoro. Good afternoon. I always find it hard to sort of introduce myself, but I think a really good sort of umbrella is storyteller. I like to think of myself as telling stories, whether it's through traditional journalism, through photography, through curating events, content creation, through speaking. I firmly believe that everything we do is rooted in story. So storyteller is sort of a good encapsulating title. I'm Nigerian, by the way.
And Lewis?
Hi everybody, my name is Luis Munana. I am from Namibia. So basically in my country, in the media space, nothing happens. So upon studying in Cape Town in South Africa, I actually realized that, I've been trying to get away from Namibia to work in the media industry in other countries. So then I realized that why not start at home, start to build an industry at home. So that's how I got into production. I am a finance person. That's why I studied finance in varsity, but I ended up in media, and I became a producer, a content creator for TV, as well as a creative director for events. And yeah, basically that's about it. We'll get into detail when we start the conversation. Yeah, I'm from Namibia.
I'll try and introduce myself very quickly. These things can be quite awkward when you have to do it yourself. But I'm Yasmin Ahmed, and I'm a student here at the Blavatnik studying public policy. I've worked as a journalist for a few years before joining the school. And yeah, that's about it. So I'm really excited to get this started. The topic today is African art and media and its role in entertainment and public expressions on social and cultural issues. And the first thing that comes into mind when you think about this topic is narratives. And obviously when you work in the creative industry, narratives are very important, and how you create this narrative is crucial. And so, Lewis, as you have created the first ever children's series in Namibia, or some know as Nambia, Namibia is now one of 5 countries that now have a children TV series, thanks to you. Okay. And then how do you create a narrative through this medium?
Okay. First and foremost, I was babysitting my nieces and nephews, and they were watching Nickelodeon, they were watching Cartoon Network, and they knew every single word to the Princess Sophia's and the SpongeBob SquarePants, and they knew every single song. So I said, what about our stories? What happens to the African story? We have kings, we have chiefs, we have leaders and so forth, but you don't see it on TV, on Cartoon Network, and anything of that sort. So then I looked at myself, okay, somebody has to stand up and do it. So that's how I started to create the TV series, which is called Waka Waka Mu. And it basically touches on on everything political, on everything, okay, not political, but it touches on young historic leaders across Africa. So just to educate them on a very grassroots level, that this is what's out there in Africa. It's educational, it's entertaining. So it's much more powerful for a child to watch TV and hear them talking about the Kavango River. I'm from the Kavango region, and we have a river flowing. So if I'm sitting at home and I'm a child and I'm talking about the Kavango River, the attention goes like, oh wow, they're talking about where I'm from. They're talking about my region. So the narrative is, let's talk about our stories. Let's be inclusive of us. Let us identify ourselves within the TV that's so educative. It's literally a brainwashing tool. So we might as well throw in there our own stories and create our own narratives. And in that way, you are empowering the youth from a grassroots level, like the children, to actually be there and be proud of who they are. So, yeah.
And how has the public reacted to it?
Oh, wow. So basically, it's not only the kids that watch the program, it's also adults, basically the parents, because they're quite amazed because, wow, here's a show and they're talking about us. And aside from it being in English, we are translating it in our native languages, because there's a saying that goes, if you speak to me in English, I can hear you. I mean, I can listen, but speak to me in my language, I'm hearing you. It's actually the language of the heart. So imagine you sitting at home and you're watching cartoons in your native language. So that's actually the aim of Waka Wakamu. And aside from it being in Namibia, we were in France last month at the Cannes MIP-TV Festival, and that's where we're actually pitching the show. And they love it. Next week, I'm signing a deal in the UK, so it will start airing in the UK, it will air in the States, and we're trying to get it to air across Africa as well. So the whole idea is once it goes to Nigeria, for example, we create an English version and an Igbo version of Hausa or whatever native, local languages that you guys have there. Yeah. So the response is, it's ours, it's something that all of us can be proud of. We're putting it out there, and we are starting to educate the kids from a very, very young age to have an African narrative on TV already from the start. So,
Thank you. And Anita, you have risen at the forefront of the African broadcast industry. And how do you create these narratives through the hit TV shows that you have created yourself?
Well, I think from a long time, from maybe about easily 10 years ago, I knew that the media landscape would change dramatically and drastically. I knew that there would come a time when, just like my brother Lewis had said, if we didn't hold on to our own stories, if we didn't become custodians of our stories would be taken, repackaged, and sold to communities around the world without any endorsement from us. So essentially, what I sought to do was speak the language of the diaspora. What's the language of the diaspora? You are outside of the continent of Africa. You are blessed to be in a place that is developed enough for you to tap into certain resources that may not necessarily be available on the continent just yet. But if you take the experience that you have, the systems that are in place outside of the continent of Africa, and if you merge that and you marry that with who you are intrinsically, your culture, your tradition, and who you are becoming, this evolved personality, this global personality, what it is you are telling the African story, but you can tell it anywhere in the world. It would make sense anywhere in the world, and most importantly, it'll connect with Africans outside of the continent. It will inspire Africans on the continent. And if you want an emerged continent, that is the best way to go, not to speak a language that is only unique to you, but to speak a global language. So what I did was create TV shows in formats that were popular. Reality TV shows, of course, in partnership with a lot of other people, iFactory, so many other production companies. What I did was create reality TV shows in the high production value that can be seen anywhere in the world, but focusing on Africans who are doing well. The other thing I realized is Africans don't like to tell their stories, not because they can't, but because they are afraid of probably being pointed fingers at, or they're afraid of situations where people ask them, so really, how did you make your first million? And they're afraid of having to tell the real story about how they made their first million. Or they're afraid of talking about failures. And Africans don't like to hold on to their failures because a failure in Africa just seems to be a horrible failure. Whereas a global language for failure means try it, try again. So we had to start telling stories where people could genuinely say, listen, this life that you think I'm living actually took me 30 years to build. It took me 30 years to develop. And so there is nothing wrong with having to start from the grassroots. There's nothing wrong with growing up in a family where you don't have enough to eat. There's absolutely nothing wrong with starting a business and losing everything. But there's everything powerful and beautiful about saying, you know what, this is who I am because I created it. So thank you very much, Yasmin, for calling my shows hit TV shows. But I would say that, and thanks be to God for it, I was inspired by the everyday African story that is beautiful to tell, not just because it's colorful, but because it's true, it's authentic, and it's original.
Thank you. And Enuma, how do you tell narratives? You're a storyteller and a writer by profession.
Like I said, I think storytelling is central to everything that we do. Right before I came in here, I was interviewed briefly, and one of the questions she asked me is, I grew up in several different countries. I was born in the States, my parents are Nigerian, lived in Ivory Coast, England, et cetera, et cetera. And she asked me, with all the different countries you've lived in, what has been one prevailing African narrative that you've heard that's been consistent? And I thought it was a brilliant question because I had to think about it. It's like, well, I can think about, a prevailing African narrative that I got from the media, and then I can think about one that I got from my home, from, within my own culture, my community. And they're very different. And so I'm trying to think about which one shaped me the most. And it was the one I got from home, which was that Africans are rich and resourceful and our women are strong. I come from a line of very strong, bold women who ventured out into the world, out of Africa, at a time in their lives when they weren't supposed to be doing that. So I think the stories, and that is what has shaped my own understanding of what it means to be an African woman. So to the extent that even though I was raised in various countries, I moved back to Nigeria 4 years ago to live there for the first time as an adult. And I really think that the stories that we listen to will really determine the types of stories we tell about ourselves and about other people. And I think there's an undeniable link between the stories we hear and the extent of our imagination. And if we can't, imagination, I think, is a concept that we don't talk about enough when we think about building narratives, when we think about changing structures. Because if you can't imagine it, you can't go after it. And the only way that you can imagine things is if you've been given some sort of prerequisite, if you have some template for it. So if we're not writing these stories, if we're not telling these stories, whether visually, whether through journalism, whether through creating new shows or new characters, then how will not only our contemporaries, but those who come after us, how will their imaginations be fed? I could go on about this. I'll stop. I want to say so much more.
So from this issue of narratives, let's talk about taboos. And in some cultures, it's very difficult to have these difficult conversations because of social taboos. And through your work within the creative industry, as broadcasters, entrepreneurs, writers, how do you tackle these issues and how do you make these difficult conversations easy? And do you think it's your responsibility and the responsibility is on us as creative people to actually get the conversation started? Lewis?
You can throw
You can take it.
I think that, again, taking it off from where I left off, or starting from where I left off, there is a responsibility that we owe to ourselves, we owe to our children and our children's children on being able to unveil and remove conversations or remove the cap off conversations that our mothers and our grandmothers and grandfathers, etc., put a cap on. I think it comes with confidence, it comes with boldness, it comes with the responsibility that you want to lay claim to. Being able to talk about taboo means that you are ready to take the responsibility of continuing the conversation anywhere in the world. And you're ready for the flack, you're ready for the fight, and you're ready for whatever it is it comes with. But it also means that you are well-versed and well-educated. And that's what tends to be our problem sometimes, is that we know what the taboo is. We may have seen or heard someone who has gone through the experience, but we refuse to uncover, to discover, to learn enough to either, I would say, support it, debunk it, You know what I mean? So it is our responsibility. This is the generation of boldness. This is the generation of openness. This is a generation of confidence and conversation. If we don't do it, our children will never know how to deal with it. And if we don't do it, that conversation of taboo, as you say it so well, will be taught to us by someone who doesn't even lay claim to the culture or the tradition or the practice.
Okay, just to touch on taboo, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the movie Ingceba. Ingceba was in South Africa, and it was screening the same time as 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades Darker. But for some reason, Ingceba was taken off from the whole cinema circuit, and 50 Shades stayed. And the reason why there was so much controversy around Ingceba is because it was tackling two things. Basically, they were highlighting the Xhosa ritual, which is of a young boy becoming a man. So that is a very big taboo because it's something sacred. Women aren't supposed to know about it, and it's something that happens deep in the mountains. So you go and you spend some time in the mountain, then you come back. And then the second issue was there was a homosexuality theme underlining all over that. So in all essence, everybody was up in arms. So our fellow Africans were, no, the movie shouldn't be screened, and people were trying to get rid of the movie and so forth. So as an artist, it's sometimes very difficult to just put your work out there, irregardless of what story you are trying to tell. Because like Anita mentioned, if you don't tell that story, someone else is going to do it. So the reason why the cast decided to actually go ahead with it and be part of the movie is because the producers of the show were Westerners from the Western world. So they said, okay, if you guys are going to create this movie, let us be part of it because it's our story to tell. So, like she said, if we aren't part of that narrative, someone else is going to come in and they will tell our stories for us. And the accuracy in all of that is going to be taken away. So that's my take on taboo as an artist, because also we are very expressional, yeah? We have lots of expressions that we love to put out there, but the fear of the backlash, the fear of how is my mother going to perceive this, because it's something unspoken of, it's uncultural, it's not African basically, and I'm putting it out there in the world. So that sort of holds us back. But like she said, we are a generation of, like, we're bold now, we are ready, we are rebels, we are saying that this is our art, this is our story, we are going to put it out there. So that's how we are trying to move forward through the taboo narrative. Yeah.
Thank you. Inuma, you've actually written a book on taboo and faith. And how have you, from your experience, how do you think we can tackle these taboos through arts and through your works?
Yeah, I think a few things. First, I think we need to sort of talk about what this taboo means, right? So taboo is not just things that we're typically hush-hush about. It's not just sexual issues. It's not just, but to in various contexts, and this is why I think our storytelling on the continent, which is what we're speaking about, it has to be contextual, right? So we have to think about the places in which we're telling these different stories. So for example, living in Nigeria, it could be very taboo to talk about the Civil War because nobody wants to revisit that time of that history. So I think about when Chimamanda Adichie's book was made into a movie, Half a Yellow Sun, and for the longest time it was banned. We couldn't show it in Nigeria. And people had their various ideas for why that was, but I think a big one was because it could bring up memories of a time that was very painful for our country, and who knows what that could lead to. So taboo encapsulates things that happened in the past. Memory is a really powerful tool, and in various contexts we don't want to remember things because we're afraid it could lead to other things. I think it's also it can be taboo to talk. So just sort of expanding this notion of taboo. And as far as in relation to the arts, I think it's really hard to find art that is not in some way political. And again, as a writer, I really think that the way we use words and the way we think about words is important. So when I say political, I don't just mean traditional politics. I'm talking about ways that will cause conflict, right, in the way we think, in the way we speak to one another, in the way we... So art is... So the arts visual, written, whatever it is so powerful because I think it can change behavior. It elicits conversation. And when you elicit conversation, what you're doing is you're getting people to use their minds and to think. And I think it was Linda, maybe, or the First Lady, I can't recall which one, said, that the oppressor's biggest tool is to control the mind. Art forces you to use your mind. So when we think about how have I used my tool as a writer to talk about taboo topics, whenever I write about something, I try to take something that we typically think we have a handle on, that we typically think we know how this should end or we know what our views are on this, and turn it around so that you're forced to think, oh, I never thought about that perspective. I never thought about that side. And in some sense, that's approaching the things that you were so sure you had an answer to. So for me, talking about taboo things, it runs the gamut. It runs the gamut from how dare you write an article that focuses on fashion and Islam. I wrote one during last Ramadan. Living in Nigeria, I live in the northern part of the country that's predominantly Muslim, and since living there, I've been really drawn to how beautiful the women dress, how beautifully how beautiful they dress. But one thing I was particularly drawn to is what it elicited for me is how I think about my body, how women think about their owning the space around their body. And we're so used to thinking about, at least in my understanding and in my communities, we're so used to thinking about Islam and women and Muslim women and having this perspective that we must know how they feel. It must be a negative, it must be XYZ. But to actually live in a context where you're engaging women who follow this tradition daily and you're seeing it, it's given me a completely different perspective, a way to think about, well, gosh, I come from a place in the West where you're supposedly more free the more skin you show. Does that make sense? It's forcing me to think about even things that are within my own tradition. And as a woman, the last panel I attended was on feminism. To think about owning the space of your own body can manifest itself in various ways, right? So the article I wrote was on fashion and Eid, which is the end of the celebration of Ramadan. And where I come from, women typically take time and make beautiful new outfits to celebrate, a successful fast. So I did the spread for a magazine in the US, and the response was so amazing to me. That people who would write to me and say, you've given me a completely new way to think about these two different spaces. So taboo can manifest itself in many ways, and it's not always getting at those topics that everyone says, you shall not talk about that. Sometimes it's getting at the topics that we think we already have, that we make vast negative assumptions about. So.
Yeah, and the next question is, how do we then use the media and arts to eliminate some of the toxic beauty standards, not just in Hollywood, but also affecting some countries in Africa and around the world? Yeah. How do we do that through arts and the media?
I love that you talked about beauty. I'm going to jump on this. Okay, so since moving back to the continent, one of the things I've been struck with the most, both personally and intellectually in my thought, is what it's like to live in a context where you are the standard of beauty. It is so different than living in a place where your beauty is always in question. Well, where, oh, you're beautiful for a black girl. Right, like that's something I heard, from in America, or I know people who. So to live in a place where not only do you recognize yourself as a standard of beauty, but you see your own perception of beauty is brought into question because of what you've been trained, right? The stories that you have taken in subconsciously. So now you're looking around like, oh my gosh, the women there probably think I have issues because I'm always staring, right? Because there's so many beautiful women who surround me. So I've been playing with, I'm a very slow writer, I'm a very slow thinker. So I've been playing for about a year with ideas around how geographical space and how when you move from one part of the country, one part of the world to another, the center of the world shifts for you, right? So the center is no longer whatever country you've been living in. And when that center shifts, how does that affect the way you perceive so many other things? Which is why I think not just travel, but those who have the opportunity to live in a different country, in a different part of the world, it's it's so mind shifting that I would say it's essential if it's a possibility for you, because it just does something to the way you think and the way you focus. And I think we're seeing, I mean, gosh, all of us can think of examples that we're seeing ways in which traditional standards of beauty are being challenged and shifted. We see it in America, we see it in the Middle East, we're seeing it in many different places. But until we ourselves can get a purchase on our own ideas of what it means to be beautiful, it's not going to make a difference if I see in Vogue magazine Anita as the centerpiece or as the front cover. Because in my mind, it's like, that's interesting. They put her on the cover. That's, provocative, right? As opposed to normal. And I think also not just when we think about beauty, we can't just think of the exterior, right? That's a whole nother concept. I think at the Met Museum, speaking of fashion, the last Met Gala, the theme was Heavenly Bodies. And they were playing with the concept of beauty in the Catholic tradition, which opens up a whole other idea of, again, working with the imagination. What does it mean for something to be beautiful? And does beauty have a purpose? Which I actually believe that it does. I think that we don't appreciate beauty enough for beauty's sake. I think the more we engage beauty, the more we see things that are beautiful. And that affects the way in which we walk and exist in space around the world. So I'll stop there.
Okay. So I'm an avid advocate for take what's working in the global space, bring it back home and localize it, basically. So, so after going to fashion weeks in Nigeria, in South Africa, in New York, and all of that, we didn't have a fashion week in Namibia. So that's one of my projects that I came up with, which was the Windhoek Fashion Week. It's been 3 years running now. So what we were trying to do was take back our power, just like Anita said. We have a very rich tradition in Namibia in terms of our visual aesthetics when it comes to fashion. We have the Himba. Some of you might have seen it in the Black Panther movie. One of the tribes was the Himba. We have the Herero, we have the Shivambo, and our fashion is original. It's beautiful, it's out there. So Take Back Your Power meant that we need to take Fashion Week that's working all over the world. We do our own Fashion Week and we show these garments on the runway, irregardless of how culturally they are. If it's not high fashion according to the international standards, we still show it on the runway. So what we did to take it to a global scale was invite Vogue, Refinery, media from across Africa, media from the States, and they came to cover it. So that's how they realized that in terms of fashion, the Western world isn't the standard for beauty. There's other forms of what men and women look like. Speaking about Namibia now, so that got taken into a whole different level. There was a video on social media, it got almost 5 million views. And these views are from all over the world. They're like, wow, I didn't know the Herero dressed so beautifully and so forth. So it's all about taking what you have and putting it on a global platform using our African arts medium, entertainment, TV, social media, and so forth, so that you actually redefine the narrative and say that this is what we have and this is what we have to offer the world. Of course, not forsaking the Western context of beauty, but we have to be proud of what's ours, and we have to show that we're proud of what's ours. That's the only way people will take notice and say that actually there's also fashion in Namibia, in Africa. So that's how we overcame that narrative.
Can I just add to that and say we have to do that within the continent as well? Yeah. So being aware of what's happening in Namibia, I have to be aware of that in Nigeria. Like, it's so important to change the perceptions globally, off the continent, but it's also as important to share within the continent, because that's the only way we will become a united Africa, when we're actually aware of one another's stories and when we see it as our stories as well. Like, I can respect that this is a different culture, but as an African, it is also part of my story.
I think there are 54 countries in Africa, which means there are 54 different kinds of fashion, different kinds of color, different kinds of expression. And honestly, I think Africa is the most beautiful continent. To not be able to see the uniqueness in what we represent is to dispel your fashion sense. Fashion isn't just the clothes we're wearing. Fashion is the sound of your traditional name and how you want to teach the person from another country how to pronounce your Nigerian name. How I am from Ghana and I want to learn how to pronounce Enuma. That's fashion. Fashion is how an individual, a man, wears his hair from Namibia, and how I can compare it to my brother Kojo from Kumasi and say that, oh, you know what, with Ghanaian men, they like to kind of draw a mark. And Louis can say, well, you know what, with Namibian men, we kind of put the marks at the back of our head. That is fashion. Fashion, we need to move away from talking about fashion as if it only belongs on the runway with size 2 models. Fashion is the way we walk through a door and happily and openly tell the world that we are from Lesotho, without worrying that the person we're speaking to won't know that it's from a Southern African or from the Southern African part of the continent. There were times when we didn't want to tell people what our day names were, what our African names were. Today, it's fashionable to say, my name is Anita, but you know what, you can call me AC because that's my traditional name. Yeah. And everybody goes, oh wow, AC, what does that mean? And what does that mean alone is an entire story that the world has to hear. So I'm so happy that we're talking about the traditional sense of fashion. But I think that, again, the root of our fashion as a continent is we are 54 independent states, which means there are 54 ways of expression what description of fashion is, according to who you are, according to where you were born, according to the size of your hips, if you like, or according to the tone or the click of your language, if you like. And the only way to teach people that fashion is a beautiful thing from Africa to the rest of the world is by being open with creating movies that have themes of Africa, different parts of Africa, creating songs in our local languages that can still top the charts across the continent, having cartoons that are being told in our language. All of that is fashion, really. And then, of course, let us not be lazy with assuming that, and I say this very respectfully, Louis, I don't mind Vogue at all coming to Africa, but where is our Vogue? Why must Vogue come to Africa and then, by then, only am I able to define the fact that, Mama, I made it big? You know what I mean? And these are things that we haven't done, and we should start to do. So the day we have a magazine that can go from Africa to the rest of the world is that day when we're able to define what fashion means. Let the world too copy from us, and let us see and say, hey, that woman or that man, that thing they're wearing or that thing they're saying, oh yeah, that's an African fashion thing. So we are really custodians of fashion in our way, or in our, according to our definition. And we should not be fearful that a jacket that we wear is a different style from the jacket that perhaps I saw at Zara. This is my African fashion. This is jacket done in my African way, and it shall be on the front cover of an African glossy magazine that will sell around the world. We've got to lay claim to it. Otherwise, we're losing it. And right now, if you ask me, enough rhetoric. We are done losing it. It's now time to skip and jump over that fear of, if I do it, would I get support? And just do it so we can redefine what things mean to us, not what things look like they should mean, but what they mean to us.
I think, Anita, what you said is so interesting, especially the last part where you talk about how we need to start being the ones that people sort of, what do you call it when you replicate? Mimic or imitate. Yeah. That already happens, right? So I think the key thing is, how do we lay claim to it? You know, we see our styles on the runway. We see our materials on the runway. We see, you know, so it's and that more and more people are beginning to lay claim to it and say, you know what, that comes from here. Stella McCarthy, you can't do that without people coming back.
Sorry, Yasmin, I know you want to jump in. Louise, I'm coming. I know it's now it's getting hot in here. Beautifully said. Yeah. But do you even realize? And I'm sorry, I don't have the education. I know we're online, so please don't quote me. You know, don't quote me necessarily too late.
You're recorded.
Stella McCartney could possibly have taken a print that was created, let's just say, for lack of a better example, in China.
Well, probably was created in
It
China.
never came through the continent. And it never came through the continent because in there somewhere, we forgot that as a continent, buying from outside and creating isn't originality. Are you with me? So the moment we start creating factories that employ hundreds and thousands of young people who are known to be creating this fabric, this print, the moment even our kente is perhaps, kente from Ghana, we're Africa here.
Yeah.
But the moment we start creating, and that's why I use the word authenticity, originality. If Stella McCartney was using kente, perhaps she came to Ghana, I would even celebrate the fact that she's selling an African outfit, because I would know that somebody somewhere in Ghana ate from this outfit that she's selling for £1,000. But as long as I can't prove that, and as long as, of course, our youth, our young people are unemployed, try to figure things out, I will always say that she could have got the idea from anywhere. What is our role? What is the role we played as a continent in that outfit? Forget about what the outfit looks like. Forget about the prints that was used. If we have a role, if I can prove that this print was done in a factory somewhere in Namibia or Ghana or Tanzania, or if I can prove it, then I'm still walking around with pride, because then I would say this outfit comes from Namibia.
Yeah.
But right now, we are not producing. So we are losing out. Sorry, is it getting hot in here?
I'm
so sorry. Sorry, Yasmin, this is us. I apologize.
Actually, I just wanted to add on what you said about laying claim on something that's ours. There was something trending on Twitter last month. I don't know if you guys know the designer from South Africa. His name is Laduma.
Yeah.
Maklosa. So basically what...
we don't know how to pronounce the last name. But
So basically, Maklosa is out there. We know his print, we know his style, and that's also something that worked in his benefit, because he has this original sense of style according to what he creates and how he creates. So, like you said, if I see this shirt, I know that's Maklosa.
Yes.
Yeah, so what Zara did, they replicated one of his designs, socks.
and he's going to go after them.
He went after them.
Thank you.
He had lawyers going after them. 1 week later, all those socks were pulled from Zara. So it's very important to have, like what you said, have claim and have something that, if I look at it, I say, that is coming from Namibia, that is coming from Zambia, and so forth.
And you can see it.
And you can see it.
Also, I love that. You know,
Yeah.
and I think you said something about being able to be on the covers of magazine. Sorry, Yasmin, I know you want to jump in here. Being able to be on the covers of magazine. This jacket is made by a young designer in Ghana called Christy Brown. And it is a proud moment for me. Every time, even if they don't like it, they'll go, wow. And I say, I know you don't like my jacket. But, no. But the point I'm trying to say is, if I saw this jacket in a window somewhere of a major brand, I would be able to step back and call my girl, and say, hey, yo, Charlie, the jacket you did for me last year, I see that they're doing different styles here, because it is created at home. That is the seal. The seal is creation.
Very important.
And I guess when you look at the theme of this entire conference, concrete action. Concrete action for me doesn't just mean sit around and talk rah, so that you came, and you can take pictures and put on Instagram. But that when you leave, these 10 fingers that God has given you, these 2 hands, that you will put them to something and you will create. That's what Africans we're good at. We can create with our hands. That is our blessing. So maybe we love music and dance and whatever it is, but our blessing really is in the hands, and the fact that we don't fear to sweat. It's in our DNA. So let us create. Because it's only in creating that, yes, we can even sue somebody who decides that they want to play smart on us.
I think there are many levels, there are many steps to this, right? So even though that designer can sue because everyone recognizes his brand, that is not the case in every country, right, in Africa. So
that is very true.
Even if you're aware, so even having the intellectual awareness and conversation is a starting point for some, right? And then with the creation, you're wearing made in Ghana, I'm wearing made in Nigeria. Every time I speak, I wear something that's made in Nigeria. Even what I wore last night was made in Nigeria. And so people see this on Instagram, people back home will go, oh my gosh, that's design. That's the name of so or people come up to me and say, oh, I love your dress. Oh, it's made in Nigeria. You're kidding me, that was made in Nigeria? So there's so many ways to take small steps towards owning, changing, expanding. So I think we really have to be, again, I started by saying everything needs to be contextual. So when talking about that designer, that is contextual to Southern Africa. When talking about Ghana or Nigeria, what are the steps that we are taking, even if it's just a recognition, oh, you can't sew that dress and wear it without acknowledging where, at least the region it comes from. So there's so many steps. But it's great that we have this conversation because everyone can think, oh, I can get in on that part, or I can definitely help with that battle. Everyone's going to pick the part of the narrative that they can address and where they stand. And I think that's pretty crucial.
But that's actually...
We have 10 minutes, so we'd like to open the floor for questions. So if you,
Oh, it's okay.
it's okay. So if you have questions, you have 10 minutes. We'll take a few. Yeah.
So we really were reacting to when you were saying.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Earlier, because we agreed with you. I love what you were saying. But thank you. I think you could probably all hear me, right? Do I need this?
We're recording.
Oh, right. Okay. Hi, I'm Val from Zimbabwe.
Hi, Val.
Hi. I was just wanting to respond to what you were talking about earlier about. Whether it's fashion and the dress sense. I think what I was thinking about was how cultural appropriation, I think, is more than just it's this look or it's this idea, and then we replicate it and we vogueify it. I think the concern is it's not enough that someone in Ghana somewhere actually made that, and they benefited from it. I think there's also the hidden thing of actual intellectual property. And I worry, my concern as it becomes fashionable to be African and all this, that yes, we're starting to see Maasai print on the runway, we're starting to see this and that and over there. And for me, it goes beyond even, what Matkosa had with it was an actual, literal, plagiarism. They literally took it, and he was able to pursue them. But there's a whole industry of appropriation that's happening with just African-inspired stuff. The whole Black Panther thing. I mean, I love it, and I think that was a real cultural moment. But oh my God, at the end of the day, that's still Disney, and they made $1 billion, right?
But you also one of the things that is important for us to do. And I go back on my own words, saying that we're a generation of conversation and generation of boldness. Learn that you cannot sit, and I say this very respectfully to anybody, you cannot sit in the theater, watch a movie, and be upset that a culture has been lifted out of your continent and it's being taken somewhere globally. My thing is, if you don't like it, do something about it. No, not just to you, but generally. You know what I mean? And I like that you bring that up, because everybody's talking about how, and Black Panther did this and Black Panther. I'm sorry. Before Black Panther, even our own selves as Africans, creating movies. Show me one African movie, okay, maybe one or two. Show me 10 African movies in the last 10 years that have so boldly, happily, proudly showcased their tradition. It's because we are not doing it.
Also, just to add on what you're saying, we as artists have a very big problem. When we tend to create, we just focus on creating. We don't usually think about, okay, I'm thinking about me, for example.
We're all guilty, don't worry.
So when I'm conceptualizing, scripting, and storyboarding, that's all my mind is at. So the advice I got, and something I learned from the First Lady yesterday during the keynote address, was you need to link up with talented people who aren't necessarily in your field, that can take up what you can't do. Because I don't know about copyright law, I don't know about infringement and all of that. So if you're a lawyer, if you know about that, I have to come to you and say, listen, this is my product, this is what I have, how do I protect it? So that is something I'm doing right now, because since my show is going to the US and the UK, so I'm trying to lock it down so that if somebody tries to replicate it, then it it can. So, but that's not my field. That's not.
But Lewis, if
Yeah.
Disney comes right now and they say, hey, my brother, take $100 million, you will not take it?
I think we agree. Sorry, I'll pass the microphone
Yeah.
on because I'm sure other people have questions. And I think we agree. And I think we're all sort of talking from the same
Yeah,
place.
basically.
I think where I'm trying to press it forward is, again, this is about not just exciting us in this room and kind of being consumed by the rhetoric, but how do we actually carry it forward into practical steps? So for me, it's gosh, as we are having this moment, or this, as the world is opening up to Africa and Africanness, let's not be content with, oh man, I saw something of myself on the screen and I'm content. But it's, how do we take a piece of that and, be part of the commercial, because it's a whole industry, it's a whole universe of it. Yeah. So my question to yourselves is then, how do we, what are those practical steps? Is it an education thing? Is it networks? What do we do? I want to walk out of here with like two bullet points.
I think we should hold on
Just
to that
very quickly,
question.
yeah.
We'll take a few questions and then we'll put them
Or we
to
can talk about it
the
after.
panels. Yeah.
Okay, hi. Thanks for your contributions so far. So my name's Yemisi. So my question is probably feeds off on that one in terms of implementation, right? So especially in the media space, when you're trying to find funders, I mean, the reason why you've got Black Panthers is because you've got solid cash behind it. But when, I'd imagine some people in here are trying to do things in the space, in the media space, and you find that local investors on the continent are just not not fantastic, but if it's like a international thing, then they're happy to actually pay the money that they've pledged to sponsor. So what would you suggest? How do you go about this? Because the reality of it is, in terms of solid cash, it tends to be, yes, please.
This is probably the generation of easy access. You might not believe me. Compared to our generation, girl, give me a high five. No. This is yeah, we're both like in our mid-20s. You have the entire world on your smartphone right now. True. Let me tell you something. I appreciate concern that, well, you might not get investors in Africa, etc. Who with money wants to throw their money away? What is the track record? And I'm sitting where you are sitting right now. When I started, I had no track record. The other thing is entitlement. You are not entitled to my money. But if you can prove yourself, and where the answer to your question is coming from is, whatever it is you're doing, now more than ever, you can do it from the comfort of your bedroom, whatever it is.
Can I quickly just pause? So sorry, that's right. I agree with you 100%. No one's entitled, so everybody has to prove their concept. But what I find sometimes with non-African investors, they lay the frame, like they lay certain
foundation.
conditions with which you should make, and that has sometimes means that you alter what you initially set out to do and say. Some people say that's something you've just got to be prepared to do, but I suppose that's the issue. You just have to change what you want to do, because it has to appeal to a certain market if they're putting their money on it.
1 minute, one question. The lady in the blue.
Hi,
Please keep it nice and short.
it's short. It's more of a, my name's Annie.
Annie.
It's more of a taking ownership of who we are as a people. It's all well and good saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, I've got Nigerian friends, Namibian friends from all walks of life. But what do I know about their culture, considering they're African just like me? And what am I imparting to them as my friends, So when they see something on the runway, they know exactly where it's from and, where to find it. We're not doing that amongst ourselves. So do we expect somebody else to teach us that?
Exactly.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. Thank you very much for joining us, and please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.